I stood at the edge of the opulent ballroom, feeling utterly out of place and painfully alone. The golden glow of soft chandeliers bathed the swirling crowd in nostalgic light, and the sound of laughter and clinking champagne flutes echoed against marble floors. Women in elegant gowns and men in tailored suits swept past me, their footsteps a rhythmic whisper on the polished tiles. I smoothed my hands over the midnight blue silk of my dress, trying to steady the flutter in my stomach. The fabric was soft under my fingertips, but it did little to comfort the nerves twisting inside me. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, a gala hosted by my former company to honor longtime employees and loyal partners. I had almost not come at all. At 55, newly divorced and quietly phased out of my managerial role for a fresh perspective, a younger male perspective if I was honest, I wasn't exactly in a festive mood. A younger coworker, my former assistant in fact, now held the position I had worked decades to earn. It stung. The polite smiles and feigned congratulations at my early retirement only added salt to the wound. But worst of all was knowing he would be here tonight. My ex-husband, Richard, mingled comfortably in the crowd, his booming laugh recognizable even across the hall. I spotted him holding court near the orchestra stage, his arm wrapped possessively around a much younger woman in a slinky red dress. That used to be me. On his arm, part of a power couple everyone admired. Now I was just Evelyn Clark, the cast-aside ex-wife standing alone by the punch table, trying to avoid pitying glances. I swallowed hard and looked away, heat creeping up my neck. The humiliation of Richard leaving me for a woman half my age still burned, even 3 years after our divorce was finalized. A burst of applause drew my attention back to the stage, where a string quartet had begun a waltz. The melody was sweet and aching, stirring up memories I thought I'd buried. Memories of when I loved to dance, when Richard would spin me around our kitchen just to see me smile. I blinked away the sudden mistiness in my eyes. I hadn't danced since the divorce. I wasn't even sure I remembered how. As couples moved to the dance floor, I shrank further back, hovering near a marble pillar. The prospect of standing there alone while everyone else glided in pairs filled me with dread. Already I caught sight of my former assistant, now the company's rising star, whispering something to a colleague while looking my way. They both covered their mouths, stifling laughter. My cheeks flamed. I could almost hear the catty commentary. Poor Evelyn. No partner, no career. What a sad woman. My heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and defiance. I refused to let them see me crumble. Not tonight. If I was going to show up to this gala, I would not be the pathetic figure they all expected. I straightened my spine and lifted my chin, channeling every ounce of poise I'd learned in my 55 years. You are strong. You are here by choice, and you will not be embarrassed, I told myself. But that was easier said than done. The waltz was in full swing now, the swirling couples a blur of color and grace. I felt a lump in my throat. This was a mistake. I should have stayed home with a good book and a cup of tea. What was I trying to prove by coming here alone? Just as I considered making a quiet exit, I caught sight of him. Across the ballroom, near a table laden with crystal glasses, stood a tall, distinguished man unlike any other in the hall. He was perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s, with silver threaded through the dark hair at his temples. Even from a distance, I could sense an aura of command about him. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that accentuated broad shoulders and a proud, rigid posture. One hand rested on a polished cane, more an accessory than a necessity, given how steady he appeared on his feet. People gave him a wide berth, unconsciously respecting an invisible boundary around him. He stood alone, observing the room with piercing gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. There was a stillness to him, a controlled power in the way he held a simple glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid idly. I had never seen him at any of our company events before, and I was certain I would remember if I had. He was the kind of man who etched an impression whether you wanted him to or not. Leaning toward me, a waiter refilled my champagne flute. I murmured a thank you, still watching the lone man with quiet curiosity. Two well-dressed socialites approached him, clearly flirting as they offered their hands in greeting. He gave them a polite nod, but notably he did not shake either offered hand. Instead, he set his drink down and clasped both hands atop the silver wolf's head pommel of his cane. One woman, emboldened, lightly touched his forearm as she laughed at something she said, but he immediately, almost imperceptibly, stepped back. The message was clear by the hard set of his jaw. No touching. The women exchanged awkward glances and drifted away, their giggles turning to whispers behind their fans. I realized I was staring. My friend and former colleague Marjorie sidled up then, following my gaze. "That's Vincent Romano," she whispered conspiratorially. "Who?" I asked, tearing my eyes from the mysterious man. Up close, Marjorie's heavy perfume and the wine on her breath flooded my nose. "Vincent Romano," she repeated softly, as if speaking a dangerous secret. "He's some kind of reclusive tycoon. Never comes to these things, but the higher-ups must have coaxed him out tonight for the big client reveal." I frowned. The name rang a bell. Romano, as in Romano Industries? I recalled a news snippet. Romano Industries was a powerful conglomerate with hands in everything from shipping to real estate. Our firm had been courting a partnership with a logistics giant rumored to be owned by them. Marjorie nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, but there are other rumors. They say he's old money, like old, and connected." She tapped her nose meaningfully. "If you know what I mean." I did know. She meant Mafia connected. My stomach did a little flip. Of course, at a corporate function, there wouldn't be an openly acknowledged mob boss. But wealthy businessmen with underworld ties did exist. Studied Mr. Romano again. The commanding presence, the deference others gave him, the subtle wariness in Marjorie's tone. It fit. "He never dances," Marjorie went on, confirming what I'd observed. "In fact, he never lets anyone touch him. I heard even handshakes are off limits. Supposedly, one time a city councilman slapped him on the back, and one of Romano's bodyguards nearly broke the guy's arm before Romano waved him off. He's notoriously untouchable. Untouchable. That word resonated in me, heavy with more than one meaning. He kept himself isolated, insulated, not unlike what I had done since my divorce. Except in my case, it was loneliness and fear of being hurt again that kept me from reaching out. What was his excuse? As the waltz music swelled to a crescendo, a rash idea seized me. Perhaps it was the champagne bubbling courage through my veins, or the desperate refusal to be pitied by my former colleagues. But in that moment, I saw an opportunity. If I was going to dance tonight, if I was going to salvage any shred of pride, I needed a partner who would make everyone stop and take notice. Someone so unexpected that it would silence their gossip for good. My eyes locked on Vincent Romano. He was still standing by the table, alone amid the crowd. The very idea was absurd. He was a man who allowed no one near him, and I was a stranger. Yet something about that aloof posture, the flicker of emptiness I thought I saw in his eyes, emboldened me. Perhaps he was as lonely in that crowd as I felt. Before I could second-guess myself, I downed the rest of my champagne in a single gulp and squared my shoulders. "Cover me," I murmured to Marjorie, thrusting my empty glass into her hand. "Evelyn, what are you—" she began. But I was already striding forward, propelled by a mix of courage and recklessness I hadn't felt in years. Every step across the ballroom rang in my ears, the tap of my low heels on marble sounding louder with each heartbeat. I weaved through the dancing couples, my pulse thrumming like the violin strings that sang through the air. Closer, step by step, until at last I stood just a pace away from Vincent Romano. He noticed me at once. Those storm-gray eyes flicked to me sharply, alert and guarded. Up close, I felt the full force of his presence, like standing too near a blazing fire. A faint scent of warm cologne and smoke drifted from him, stirring something in my memory. Safety, warmth, a fireplace on a cold night. The sensation was disarming. For a fraction of a second, neither of us moved or spoke. I realized I was holding my breath. The plan that had seemed so clear across the room now felt insane under his steely gaze. Up close, Vincent Romano was even more intimidatingly handsome. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, the faint shadow of stubble peppered with silver. Fine lines etched the corners of his eyes, hinting at experience, hardship, maybe sorrow. I suddenly felt exposed, foolish. What could I possibly say? I dropped into a polite half-curtsy, an old-fashioned reflex from my youth, and offered a tremulous smile. "Mr. Romano," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "Forgive my boldness, but would you do me the honor of this dance?" His eyebrows lifted, a subtle movement that nonetheless conveyed utter surprise. Up close, I noticed a thin scar cutting through his left brow, an unexpected imperfection that somehow made him more real. He regarded me in silence for a heartbeat longer, those unreadable eyes flicking over me from my silver hair swept into a chignon, to the modest sapphire pendant at my neck, down the length of my navy gown. I felt as though I were being assessed down to my soul. Heat bloomed in my cheeks under his scrutiny. My heart thudded painfully. He hadn't said a word. What if he laughed at me or worse, brushed me off with cold disdain in front of everyone? I could practically feel Marjorie's horrified stare from across the room and the curious eyes of others nearby. This was a terrible mistake. Just as panic was about to overtake me, Vincent inclined his head ever so slightly. "The honor would be mine," he said, voice low and resonant. For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard. But then he set his cane against the table, and with a graceful motion, extended his hand to me. It hung there in the air between us, large and steady, waiting. Tentatively, I placed my fingers in his. His skin was warm, his palm calloused as it enveloped my smaller hand. A jolt of something electric passed through me at the contact. Surprise, because I hadn't expected the simple touch to affect me, and perhaps a flicker of triumph because he was allowing me to touch him. Behind me, I swore I heard the clatter of someone dropping a glass in shock. Vincent stepped closer and bowed with old-world courtesy. I smelled a hint of that smoky cologne again as he inclined his head. My pulse fluttered wildly as he led me the few steps onto the dance floor. The other couples were slowing, eyes widening, parting to make room. I caught a glimpse of Richard gaping, his arm slipping from the waist of his young date. My former assistant's jaw hung open in astonishment. The shock rippling through the room was palpable. Evelyn Clark, Wallflower, had just coaxed the untouchable Vincent Romano onto the dance floor. The quartet transitioned seamlessly into the next song, a lilting, romantic foxtrot that I recognized from my youth. Vincent turned to face me, placing his free hand respectfully at my waist. The weight and warmth of that hand through the silk made my breath hitch. He was careful, reserved in how he touched me, as if testing his own boundaries. I rested my left hand lightly on his shoulder. It was solid muscle beneath the soft wool of his suit jacket. We began to move, slowly at first. My muscle memory took over where my confidence wavered. Thankfully, dancing was one thing I hadn't forgotten. Step, together, glide. I followed the gentle pressure of Vincent's lead. He was an excellent dancer, sure-footed, fluid, and far more practiced than I expected. "You're very light on your feet, Mr. Romano," I managed to say, hoping a bit of conversation would ease the intensity of his gaze. His eyes met mine, and I glimpsed curiosity there. "Call me Vincent," he murmured. His voice was deep, almost gravelly, but there was a gentleness to the way he said it. "Vincent," I corrected softly. "I'm Evelyn." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Evelyn," he repeated, as though testing how my name felt on his tongue. Hearing him say it sent a small thrill through me. We fell into a comfortable silence then, letting the music guide us. As we twirled under the golden light, I became acutely aware of everything. The crisp scent of his cologne mingling with a trace of whiskey on his breath, the subtle squeak of my satin shoes against the floor, the distant hum of chatter around us. But more than anything, I was aware of him. The strength in the arm that held me, the careful distance he maintained, just enough space to be proper. Yet our bodies warmed the air between us. A few strands of my hair had come loose from their pins, and I felt them brush my cheek. Before I could tuck them back, Vincent released my hand briefly, and oh so gently swept the errant locks behind my ear with his fingertips. The gesture was surprisingly intimate. I looked up, startled by the tenderness of it, and found him studying me. Something unspoken passed between us in that moment, a spark of connection that defied logic. I felt seen, in a way I hadn't in a very long time. "Thank you," I whispered, unsure if I was thanking him for the dance or the small kindness. Perhaps both. His gray eyes softened. "It is my pleasure," he said quietly. We continued to glide, and I dared to let a genuine smile curve my lips. All too soon, the music began to fade. I realized I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to step back into the cold loneliness that surely awaited once this dance was over. This unexpected reprieve from my isolation had been intoxicating. As the final note sounded, Vincent slowed us to a standstill. Applause rose around us, startling me. I had been so wrapped up in our little world, I'd forgotten anyone else was watching. Embarrassed heat flooded my face as I glanced around. To my astonishment, some people were actually clapping for us. Marjorie was beaming, giving me a discreet thumbs up. Others simply looked stunned that Vincent Romano had danced at all. Richard, however, was scowling, his mouth a thin line. His young girlfriend looked merely confused at his change in mood. I met Richard's eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't immediately look away. Let him see me now, I thought, standing tall on the arm of a man more dignified and captivating than he could ever be. Vincent must have sensed my tension. He leaned in slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked under his breath, concern flickering over his features. I forced myself to smile brighter. "I am. More than all right, actually," I replied, letting a bit of triumphant pride seep into my voice. He followed my line of sight to Richard, then back to me. A knowing glint touched his eyes. Perhaps he could guess at the situation. He seemed perceptive enough, but all he did was nod once, as if confirming something to himself. The crowd began to disperse as another song started up, slower and mellower. I realized I was still holding onto Vincent's shoulder, and his hand still lightly rested at my waist. A nervous flutter awakened in my belly. "I suppose we should," I began, unsure how to gracefully exit his space. The last thing I wanted was to presume upon his kindness any longer. Vincent surprised me by interjecting, "May I interest you in a drink, Evelyn?" He retrieved his cane smoothly, then offered me his arm like a proper gentleman. The old-fashioned gesture made me flush with pleasure. "Yes, I'd like that," I accepted, slipping my hand into the crook of his arm. It was a bold move given his no-touching reputation, but he didn't flinch away. Instead, he covered my hand gently with his own for a brief moment, patting it, before leading me off the dance floor. That small sign of comfort and possession, his hand warm over mine, made my heart flip. We strolled towards the refreshments, and I tried to ignore the buzz of whispers trailing behind us. My legs felt light, almost shaky, after the adrenaline of the dance. Vincent guided me steadily, his presence at my side strangely reassuring. It struck me that this was the first time in ages I was walking into a crowded room, not as part of a couple with Richard, but alongside someone else. Someone who, against all odds, made me feel safe in a room full of people who had once seen me vulnerable. At the drinks table, a waiter immediately poured us fresh flutes of champagne. Vincent quietly requested something else, a bourbon for himself, and the attentive server hurried to oblige. As the server stepped away, I noticed one of the so-called associates lingering near the bar, giving Vincent a respectful nod that he barely acknowledged. Bodyguard, I realized. It certainly explained how he'd moved so quickly to stop that councilman's overzealous pat on the back. He had watchful eyes on him at all times. Vincent handed me a champagne flute. "To unexpected dances," he offered, raising his bourbon glass. The amber liquid glinted in the light. I tapped my glass lightly to his. "And to breaking the rules now and then," I replied with a grin, emboldened by the warmth of his attention. We sipped in companionable silence for a moment. The champagne was dry and fizzy on my tongue. Though he appeared outwardly calm, I sensed a tension still coiled in Vincent, like a panther at rest but not unfocused. He seemed to be scanning the crowd even as we stood there, his eyes always moving, assessing. It made me wonder if he was enjoying himself at all, or if he was here purely as a business obligation. "You mentioned this was your company's event?" he asked suddenly, turning that penetrating gaze back to me. I nodded, surprised he remembered. "Yes, well, my former company. I worked in product development for 30 years. I actually retired earlier this year." I tried to keep any bitterness out of my tone. His head tilted slightly. 30 years is a long time. You must have been very young when you started." I couldn't help a small laugh. Flatterer. I was 25 and full of big ideas. Gave it everything, thinking I'd climb right to the top. I shrugged, keeping my smile even. I made it to a decent height on the ladder, but things change. New management, new direction. They decided I'd contributed enough. "That hardly seems fair," he said quietly. There was a hard edge to his voice that made me think he found it more than just unfair, throwing away such experience. I looked down, swirling the champagne in my glass. Life isn't often fair, but I can't complain. I got a nice severance package and a send-off party. I gestured vaguely at the ballroom. And a pity invite to this gala to make sure there were no hard feelings. He studied me for a moment, and I fidgeted with the stem of my glass. Had I said too much? It wasn't like me to spill my career woes to a stranger, but something about Vincent invited honesty. Perhaps because he felt like an outsider here too. And did it work? No hard feelings? He asked. I met his eyes and gave a wry smile. Only towards myself, for not seeing it coming. And maybe a little towards the new golden boy who took my job, but he's probably better at it, if I'm being honest. More energy, fresh ideas and all. Vincent's expression hardened. What he has in energy, I'm sure he lacks in wisdom. There's no replacement for experience, Evelyn. The conviction in his tone made warmth bloom in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone had stood up for my value. I took a slow breath. Thank you. That means more than you know. He nodded, and we fell into a gentle silence again. I found myself marveling at how at ease I felt around this man I'd met only minutes ago. There was a quiet understanding in him, on as if he too knew what it was like to invest a lifetime into something, only to have it cast aside. We were drawn out of our private bubble by an interruption. "Evelyn, good to see you," came a smooth voice. I turned to find Derek Carter, the young upstart who had taken over my position at the company, approaching with 2 cocktails in hand. He wore a slick smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad you made it tonight," he said, though I knew he was likely surprised I dared show up. His gaze flickered to Vincent at my side, and recognition dawned in his eyes. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. "Mr. Romano," Derek exclaimed, feigning pleasant surprise as he extended a hand. "Derek Carter. We didn't get a chance to meet earlier, but I've heard so much about you." Vincent offered a polite, distant nod, ignoring the hand which Derek awkwardly withdrew. Not missing a beat, Derek thrust one of the cocktail glasses toward me. "Evelyn, I grabbed your favorite, the house special martini. You always loved these, right?" I hadn't spoken to Derek since I'd left the company, and he'd never fetched drinks for me even when he was my assistant. A warning bell chimed faintly in my mind, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's thoughtful of you," I managed, taking the glass out of reflex. The liquid in the martini glass was a vivid pink, garnished with a twist of citrus. Something about the way Derek watched me made my skin crawl. Vincent's arm tensed under my hand. He stepped slightly forward, placing himself subtly between Derek and me. "Very kind," Vincent said coolly, though I believe we were about to toast with champagne. As if on cue, Vincent raised his own bourbon, ostensibly to clink against my martini. In the same motion, he bumped his cane against my wrist, so gently it looked accidental. The martini glass tilted and its contents splashed onto the marble floor before I could react. "Oh," I gasped, stepping back as pink liquid splattered my shoes. Derek jumped as well, annoyance flaring in his eyes though he tried to hide it. "What a shame," he muttered. "That was a special cocktail." "My apologies," Vincent interjected smoothly, though I sensed no real remorse in his tone. "How clumsy of me." He handed me a napkin from the bar to dab at the droplets on my skirt. In a swift motion, he also took the now nearly empty martini glass from my hand and set it aside. Derek forced a tight smile. "No harm done, I suppose." He looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to decide whether the spill was truly accidental. I offered the most benign smile I could muster, though my heart was pounding with suspicion. "Thank you anyway, Derek. That was considerate." Vincent slid an arm lightly around my back, an unmistakable gesture of protection and claim. "If you'll excuse us, Mr. Carter," he said in a tone that, while civil, brokered no argument. But Derek wasn't ready to leave. His ambition overrode his irritation. "Actually, Mr. Romano, before you go, I was hoping to introduce you to our CEO. He's been eager to speak with you about a potential partnership. I could arrange a meeting if you have a moment." He was using the opportunity to ingratiate himself, even with his little ploy foiled. I felt anger simmer in my chest, at his brazenness, and at what I now suspected he had intended with that drink. Vincent barely spared Derek a glance. "Another time, perhaps. This evening I'm otherwise engaged." Derek's smile wavered. I could see he was unused to being dismissed so curtly. His eyes flicked to me, frustration evident for a split second. I decided to deliver the finishing blow. Lifting my chin, I gave Derek a polite, dismissive nod. "We were just stepping out for some fresh air," I said. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Derek." For a heartbeat, he looked like he might protest. But between Vincent's cold stare and my newfound steel, he thought better of it. With a taut nod, he moved off, casting one last glance at the spilled drink and then at me, confusion and anger warring in his expression. Without missing a beat, Vincent guided me away, our departure probably seeming regal to anyone watching. My heart hammered with a mix of adrenaline and relief. I had never turned Derek away like that, especially not in defense of myself. The look on his face was priceless. It seemed being on Vincent Romano's arm was already giving me a boldness I never knew I had. We strolled out of the grand hall through open French doors onto a balcony that overlooked the estate's gardens. A gentle night breeze kissed my skin, carrying the scent of roses and the distant chirp of crickets. Below, fairy lights twinkled along a stone path where a few guests wandered, but the balcony itself was empty save for us. The muffled music and chatter from inside provided a backdrop to the relative quiet. I inhaled deeply, letting the cool air soothe my flushed cheeks. "Sorry about that," I said softly. "Derek can be a real piece of work. I hope I didn't presume too much by dragging you out here." Vincent released my arm and turned to face me fully. The moonlight cast silver highlights in his dark hair and outlined the strong planes of his face. He shook his head. "You needn't apologize. I welcome the excuse." He leaned on his cane with one hand, his stance easing. For the first time tonight, he looked less guarded, his shoulders not quite so rigid. "Crowds can be suffocating." I nodded in fervent agreement. "Tell me about it." I moved to the stone railing and placed my free hand on it, the cool marble grounding me. I wasn't sure I'd survive tonight at all. If you hadn't said yes to that dance, I trailed off, not wanting to imagine the alternative, likely me slipping away in embarrassment while Richard and the others smirked. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said almost to himself, "I surprised myself by saying yes." I turned to him in intrigue. "Why did you?" He looked out over the gardens, eyes distant. "When you walked up to me, I thought perhaps I was imagining things. No one approaches me so directly, let alone a beautiful woman asking me to dance." I flushed at the compliment, but he went on, voice low. "I have my reasons for keeping my distance, but something in your eyes." He paused, then glanced at me. "You looked as if you needed that dance as much as I did." I bit my lip. I hadn't expected such candor. "I think I did," I admitted softly. I needed to remember what it felt like to have fun, to not feel invisible. His gaze sharpened. "Is that how you feel? Invisible?" "Sometimes," I shrugged, trying to sound lighthearted. Middle-aged divorcee, out of the workforce now. It's easy to feel like the world has moved on without me. Tonight especially, seeing all these fresh faces at my old company, it's like I'm a relic of the past they humor out of pity. Vincent's expression grew stormy. Fools! If they don't see what they have in front of them. I looked down at my half-empty champagne flute, swirling the contents. It's not just them. Even my ex-husband didn't think I was exciting enough to stick around for. So I guess I started believing it too, that I was too old to start over, or be desirable. I gave a self-deprecating laugh. Heavy stuff for a gala, huh? I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm unloading all this on you. To my surprise, Vincent reached out and gently lifted my chin with 2 fingers, guiding my eyes back up to his. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a warmth coursing through me. In his gaze, I saw a fierce sincerity that made my breath catch. Evelyn, you have nothing to apologize for, he said, each word deliberate. Your age, your past, those only make you more captivating, not less. The people who failed to appreciate that are blind. My heart fluttered at the intensity of his tone. Under the moon's glow, his gray eyes were almost silver, reflecting determination. For a man who claimed to keep his distance, he was standing quite close now. Close enough that the heat of his body radiated through the night air, that I could see the thick fringe of his dark lashes. Thank you, I whispered, emotion thick in my throat. You barely know me, yet you're being so kind. He lowered his hand from my chin, but his fingers drifted along my jaw in a subtle caress before he let go. That simple graze sent a shiver through my entire body. Sometimes, he murmured, one doesn't need a long time to truly see someone. I felt my cheeks warm and hoped the night masked it. This kind of attention, especially from a man as compelling as Vincent, was something I'd convinced myself I'd never experience again. It frightened me how desperately I wanted to believe his words. We stood in quiet understanding for a beat, the air humming with a tension that was not unpleasant. I tried to gather my swirling thoughts. Maybe it was the champagne, but a question bubbled up that I couldn't hold back. You said you have your reasons for keeping distance, I ventured carefully. Are they reasons one can talk about? Vincent's gaze shuddered a bit. He straightened, the walls creeping back up. I regretted asking immediately. I'm sorry. That was too forward of me. He held up a hand. No, it's all right. He exhaled slowly. Let's just say, I learned a long time ago that getting too close to people can put them in danger. And me as well. It became easier to keep everyone at arm's length. His guarded response confirmed more than he probably realized. The hints of Mafia rumors, the bodyguards, the paranoia. It all made sense. If he truly was connected to dangerous business, anyone near him could be a target. The realization should have made me step back, but it strangely didn't. Instead, I found myself empathizing with the loneliness such a rule must impose. That sounds like a hard way to live, I said gently. He gave a slight shrug, as if brushing off the heaviness. It's kept me alive. And until tonight, I thought it was the only way. He fixed me with a look that sent a little thrill through me. You're the first person in years who's managed to slip past those defenses, even for a moment. A delicate silence stretched between us, laden with meaning. I placed my champagne flute beside his glass on the balustrade, deciding I'd had enough liquid courage for one night. My heart was pounding on its own now. I'm honored, I said quietly, trying to inject a lightness to ease the weight of his confession. Though I can't for the life of me figure out what I did to deserve such distinction. He almost smiled at that, a real one that reached his eyes and gentled them. You were simply yourself. I felt that warmth again, blooming in my chest like a flower opening towards the sun. For a moment, he simply looked at me, an internal battle warring in his eyes. Then his voice came out low and rough, almost a whisper. You're mine now, Evelyn. I sucked in a breath at the words. They were possessive, bold, yet the way he said my name was tender, almost pleading. He seemed to realize the intensity of his declaration. He raked a hand through his hair and let out a shaky exhale. Forgive me. That was presumptuous. His gaze dropped, and for the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. It's just... He took a step back, setting his cane aside so he could gently grasp my hands in his. The sudden openness in his expression made my heart ache. The truth is, I lost someone once, someone I cared about deeply. I failed to protect her, and it nearly destroyed me. His thumb stroked over the back of my hand as he spoke, voice raw. Since then, I vowed never to let anyone into my life like that, never risk that kind of pain again. I felt him squeeze my fingers, as if grounding himself. But tonight, with you, I realized just how empty I've been. You made me feel something I thought had died in me. He swallowed hard, silvered eyes shining with vulnerability. When I said you're mine, it wasn't to cage you. It was a promise that I will protect you with everything I have, if you'll let me. My heart was in my throat. The fierce, guarded man I'd met earlier was nowhere to be seen. Here stood a man bearing his soul in the moonlight. Emotion swelled in my chest, threatening to overflow. I did the only thing that felt natural. I stepped closer into the circle of his warmth. Vincent, I breathed, not even sure what I wanted to say. The space between us dissolved as he drew me in, his forehead gently resting against mine. My heart thundered in anticipation as I closed my eyes, tilting up toward him. Suddenly, the doors behind us swung open with a creak. One of the men who'd been lingering by the bar, a heavyset guy with a buzz cut, definitely a bodyguard type, stepped onto the balcony. "Pardon me, boss," he said respectfully. "The car is ready whenever you want to leave." Boss. The word hung in the air, confirming so much. This was certainly no ordinary businessman. Vincent gave a curt nod, tension radiating from him at the interruption. "Thank you. I'll be down shortly." The bodyguard disappeared back inside with a quick glance in my direction. Evaluation, curiosity perhaps, but he said nothing. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The night felt suddenly heavier with the knowledge of who Vincent really was, or at least, who I strongly suspected he was. A Mafia boss. It explained the caution, the isolation, the power he exuded. And here I was, a respectable divorcee who had never even gotten a parking ticket, standing in the moonlight with a man who likely had blood on his hands, or at least commanded those who did. If I had known earlier, would I have approached him? I honestly wasn't sure. But the Vincent I'd come to know in the last hour wasn't an evil man. Guarded, yes. Dangerous, perhaps, but also gentle and surprisingly considerate. The conflicting ideas made my head spin. He turned to me, an apology in his eyes. "I'm afraid I have to call it a night. Business," he said by way of explanation, mouth twisting slightly as if the word itself was distasteful. Disappointment pricked at me, sharper than it should for so brief an acquaintance. Yet I nodded in understanding. "Of course. I'm so grateful for the time you spent indulging a foolish woman's whims." I tried to smile, but it felt a touch sad. Vincent's brows drew together. "You're not foolish, and I should be thanking you, Evelyn. Tonight was—" He searched for the word. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. That was probably the closest someone like him would come to admitting he'd enjoyed himself. I smiled genuinely now. "It was for me as well." He stepped closer, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he might kiss my cheek, European style, as a goodbye. Instead, he took my hand in his and lifted it to his lips. His mouth barely brushed my knuckles, but the old-world gesture sent my stomach into a flutter. "Until we meet again," he murmured, eyes holding mine over my hand. My breath caught. Something about the way he said it made it sound like a promise. "Until then," I whispered back. Vincent released my hand with clear reluctance, and with a final gentle look he turned and walked away. I watched him stride inside and disappear among the departing guests. I remained on the balcony for a minute longer, drawing in a slow breath to steady my racing heart. The night breeze cooled the flush on my skin, but I still felt the warmth of his touch lingering like a promise. What on earth had just happened? A dance, a conversation, and yet it felt like the axis of my world had tilted in that short time. I pressed a hand to my cheek where I could still imagine the ghost of his near kiss. "Pull it together, Evelyn," I murmured to myself with a shaky laugh. I probably looked and felt like a besotted teenager. Perhaps it was the vindication of seeing Richard's stunned face, or the thrill of doing something so out of character. Or maybe it was simply the intoxicating effect of Vincent Romano himself. Intelligent, charming, and yes, a bit dangerous. A man from a world completely separate from mine, yet somehow we had found an undeniable connection on that dance floor. Eventually, I made my way out through the quiet gardens, retrieving my wrap and purse along the way. I avoided any lingering guests or curious colleagues. When I reached the drive, I waved down a taxi rather than waiting for the valet. I hadn't trusted myself to drive after the champagne anyway. As the city lights flashed by the cab window, I closed my eyes and let the evening replay in my mind. The golden glow of chandeliers, the music that carried us across the dance floor, Vincent's steady hand at my back, the protective fervor in his eyes on the balcony, and that feather-light kiss on my hand that had sent my heart aflutter. When I opened my small clutch to fetch cab fare, my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled out a sleek black business card I hadn't noticed before. Embossed on it in silver was a single name, Vincent Romano, and beneath it, a phone number. My breath caught. He must have slipped it there or had someone leave it for me, a quiet invitation to reach out. I tucked the card safely back into my purse, a secret smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something stir to life inside me that I thought had died. Hope. Hope that life still held some surprises for me yet. That perhaps I wasn't as invisible or unworthy of excitement as I'd come to believe. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if I'd truly hear from Vincent Romano again. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget this night. The night I dared to reach out, and he reached back. And in my heart, I knew it was only the beginning. 7 years later. The afternoon sun slanted golden through the dusty front windows of my little bookshop as I flipped the sign to closed. I stretched my arms, easing the kink in my lower back. At 62, a day of unpacking inventory left me more stiff than it used to. But I wouldn't trade this life for anything. Not when I had my son, our son, waiting eagerly in the back room, humming to himself as he drew crayon pictures. Ready to go, Leo? I called softly as I walked through the curtained doorway that separated the cozy shop floor from our living space behind it. A dark-haired boy looked up from where he was sprawled on the rug, crayons scattered around him. Almost, Mama, Leo replied, flashing me a gap-toothed grin. At 6 years old, he was the spitting image of his father in so many ways. The same thick, raven hair and intense gray eyes, though Leo's held an innocence and light that never failed to buoy my heart. It was a light I fiercely protected. I smiled and crouched down beside him. What are you working on there? Leo held up his drawing proudly. In bold strokes of blue and black crayon, he had sketched a scene of 2 stick figures, one small, one large, holding hands. The larger figure sported a scribbled dark suit and a cane that looked more like a lollipop. The smaller one had a wild splash of black hair. They stood under a sky full of stars. My breath caught. I knew at once who the figures were meant to be, even if Leo had never met him. He had drawn this picture in various forms, dozens of times. That's lovely, sweetheart, I said gently, brushing a lock of hair off his forehead. Are those the people from Mommy's stories? Leo nodded earnestly. It's you and the magic dancing man, he explained, as if it were obvious. He pointed to the taller figure's cane. See? I always give him a cane 'cause you said he walked with one. And I gave him a suit 'cause you said he's like a prince that wears fancy clothes. A lump formed in my throat. Magic dancing man. It was how I'd described Vincent to Leo in the bedtime stories I spun about my friend who once swept me off my feet. I never intended to tell my son much about his father. How could I, when I'd thought Vincent dead all these years? But sometimes, late at night when Leo was full of questions about why he didn't have a daddy, I found myself weaving a fairy tale version of the truth. A brave, mysterious man who danced with me under the stars and vanished to fight dragons in far-off lands. A hero who, I privately hoped, would have loved his son more than anything. I cleared the tightness from my throat and pulled Leo into a hug. He giggled as my fingers found his ticklish sides. All right, my little artist. How about we head home? I think grilled cheese is on the menu tonight. Yay, race you to the door. Leo darted from my arms and sped toward the shop's front entrance, his sneakers flashing. Laughing, I rose and followed. Outside, dusk was falling over our sleepy coastal town. I had moved here shortly after Leo's birth, seeking the anonymity and peace of a place far from the city where I'd left my heart in pieces. Over the years, I'd built something new. Small, certainly, but ours. The bookshop apartment, friendly neighbors who knew us only as Evelyn and Leo Jones, my maiden name, and a steady routine that felt safe. As we stepped out onto the cobbled street, I reached for Leo's hand. He skipped along at my side, chattering about the new comic book shipment we'd unpacked today. I listened with a smile, soaking in his animated retelling of superhero plots I barely understood. These simple moments were what I lived for now. We passed the antique street lamps that were just flickering on. A familiar figure waved from the bakery across the way. Mrs. O'Neill, who always snuck extra muffins into a bag for Leo in the mornings. I waved back, heart swelling with gratitude for the community that had embraced us. Stopping on the corner, I knelt to zip up Leo's jacket. The autumn air carried a chill and a salty breeze from the nearby harbor. Stay close to me when we cross, all right, Bug? I reminded him. He rolled his eyes in that good-natured way, but pressed closer to my side. The street was mostly empty at this hour, shops closing, everyone heading home for supper. I looked both ways, no traffic, then took Leo's hand to cross. Halfway across the narrow road, I heard it, the sudden roar of an engine. Headlights burst around the curve, bearing down on us far faster than the posted speed. My stomach dropped. A car was racing toward us, and it wasn't slowing down. Time seemed to hiccup. I tightened my grip on Leo's hand and tried to yank him forward, my heart leaping into my throat. But my heel caught a depression in the old roadway. I stumbled, panic surging as I realized we wouldn't make it across in time. Out of nowhere, a dark figure sprinted into the road. A powerful arm wrapped around my waist from behind, hauling me and Leo out of the path of the oncoming car with barely a second to spare. We lurched onto the opposite curb, just as the car blasted past, horn blaring angrily into the twilight. The world rushed back in a flurry of sound. My own ragged gasp, Leo's startled cry, the receding screech of tires. I found myself pressed against a broad, familiar chest, protected between the solid wall of a man's body and the iron lamppost behind us. One of his arms encircled me. The other was braced over Leo, sheltering him. It all happened so fast. I froze, heart pounding. Then I heard it, a low, concerned voice I had feared I'd never hear again. "Are you all right?" That voice. Older, a touch more gravelly but unmistakable. Impossible. I tilted my head up, scarcely able to breathe. Storm gray eyes met mine, wide with worry and disbelief. The fading daylight etched the beloved lines of his face in chiaroscuro. There were a few more silver threads at his temples now, a new scar above his brow that hadn't been there before. But it was him. Vincent. His name escaped my lips in a disbelieving whisper. My legs nearly gave out. Only his firm arm around my waist kept me upright. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "Evelyn," he said, my name a reverent ache on his tongue. We simply stared at each other, 7 years dissolving in the space of a heartbeat. A small whimper broke the spell. Leo. He had been shielded between us and was now clinging to my leg, his face buried against me. I dropped to my knees, wrapping him in my arms. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," I soothed, checking him over. He was trembling but unhurt. Relief made my eyes sting. Only then did I remember we weren't alone. I rose slowly, every nerve ending alive, and faced the man who had saved us. Vincent stood a pace away now, as if giving me space. The last rays of sunset caught the angular planes of his face, the sharp jaw and proud nose I'd traced with my fingers in another lifetime. His expression was a storm of emotions, shock, uncertainty, and overwhelming, aching tenderness. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Words failed me entirely. My heart galloped in my chest, and I could feel Leo peeking out from behind my skirt, curious and cautious. At last, Vincent broke the silence, voice rough and low. "I can't believe it's you. I was coming to find you, but I never imagined." He glanced at the lamppost and the now empty street, his jaw tightening at the thought of what could have happened. "Thank God I got to you in time." I made a choked sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Tears pricked hot at the corners of my eyes. I can't believe it's you either," I managed, hearing the tremble in my tone. We simply stared at one another. 7 years' worth of longing and grief and unanswered questions swirled in the air between us. I wanted to throw myself into his arms and simultaneously demand how he could possibly be alive, be here. My hands hovered protectively on Leo's shoulders, grounding myself in the reality of my son. Vincent's gaze drifted down to the little boy pressed against my side. Leo looked back at him with open curiosity, his fright now fading into intrigue. I saw the precise instant Vincent noticed the boy's eyes, gray, just like his own. His breath caught audibly. Vincent whispered, awestruck. His eyes flicked up to mine for confirmation of the impossible. I nodded, a tear spilling free to trace my cheek. My voice was barely above a whisper. Your son. Our son. A tremor went through Vincent's frame as he exhaled sharply. Our son, he repeated, tasting the words. In 2 strides, he closed the gap between us and dropped to one knee, bringing himself face to face with Leo. Up close, father and child regarded each other in wonder. Leo wasn't fearful. If anything, he studied Vincent with the frank, unguarded curiosity that only a child could manage. I realized with a start that this was the first time Leo had ever seen a man who could be his father. In our little town, I'd always been careful. But there was something in the way Leo tilted his head at Vincent. A recognition beyond logic. What's your name, little man? Vincent asked gently, emotion thickening his words. Leo, my son answered. Then he added shyly, Are you the magic dancing man? Heat flushed my cheeks. Leo, I admonished softly, mortified, yet Vincent's eyes lit with sudden amusement and profound sorrow all at once. The magic dancing man? He echoed, glancing up at me with a mixture of bewilderment and wonder. I wiped at my tear-streaked face, managing a wobbly smile. I might have told him a bedtime story or two. Vincent closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself against a wave of emotion. When he opened them, they shone wet. Leo, he said softly, holding out a hand as though afraid to spook him. My name is Vincent, and yes, I suppose I am a dancing man of sorts. A hesitant smile curved his lips. I even have a cane, see? He nodded toward the silver-handled cane lying on the pavement where it must have fallen when he lunged to save us. I hadn't even noticed it in the chaos. Leo did, though. His eyes widened. You really have one, he gasped, momentarily forgetting his shyness. He stepped forward and boldly wrapped his small hand around Vincent's much larger one. Mama said you used it like a knight uses a sword to fight bad guys. A strangled sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. Vincent's shoulders shook with a soft chuckle, even as a tear spilled down his cheek to be quickly brushed away. Your mama gives me too much credit, he said, voice unsteady. But I promise you, I'll never let any bad guys near either of you ever again. Leo looked satisfied with that answer, as if a great mystery of the world had just clicked into place for him. He glanced between us and then announced, I'm hungry. The innocent statement broke the tension. A shaky laugh burst from me as Vincent stood, scooping Leo into his arms with an ease that made my heart ache with joy. My little boy, who had never known a father's embrace, melted comfortably against Vincent's shoulder as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We were just heading home for supper, I explained, brushing at my damp eyes and trying to collect myself. My mind felt like it was swimming through molasses. I was elated, terrified, confused all at once. Vincent looked down at me, eyes searching. May I walk you home? He asked quietly. The formality of the request held a universe of deeper questions. Can I come back into your life? Will you let me? I pressed my lips together, overwhelmed. Part of me wanted to scream yes and fling myself at him. Another part, the part that had learned to guard my heart for Leo's sake, whispered caution. I'd mourned this man as dead. I'd put myself back together piece by piece for our child. And now, Like a ghost made flesh, he was here. But he had just saved our lives, and Leo was already looping his little arms around Vincent's neck, as if he'd found something that had been missing all his life. My beautiful boy, who had never had a dad, was instinctively holding on to his father. I met Vincent's gaze. In it, I saw anguish and hope and love unspoken. 7 years. We had so much to say, but some small, fragile part of me believed this was fate handing me a second chance I never thought I'd get. "Yes," I finally whispered, voice catching. "Please walk us home." Relief broke over his face. He inclined his head, the old-world gentleman in him, even as his eyes brimmed with gratitude and something like disbelief. Together, our unlikely trio made our way down the block. Leo chattered happily to Vincent the whole time, filling the evening air with childhood exuberance. "Mama owns the bookstore. She lets me read the comics as long as I don't crinkle the pages," he informed Vincent matter-of-factly. "Do you like books? I like space books and pirate books best." Vincent listened as though each of Leo's words were the most precious gift. "I do like books," he responded warmly. "And pirates, you say? Perhaps I can tell you about a real treasure island I once visited." Leo's eyes went huge. "You've been on a treasure island?" Vincent shot me a sideways glance, a hint of his old roguish charm peeking through. "Well, I might be exaggerating a little, but I have traveled on a ship and found some treasure." Leo gasped in delight, already utterly enamored. I watched this exchange in quiet amazement. Despite the storm of emotions raging inside me, I realized I had never doubted that Vincent would be wonderful with his son if given the chance. Seeing it now, it was everything. At last we arrived at the narrow townhouse that held our shop below and home above. I unlocked the door with trembling hands. My mind spun. Should I invite him in? Do we talk on the doorstep? How does one even begin to bridge 7 years of separation? Leo made the decision for me. He tugged Vincent's hand, pulling him over the threshold. "Come on. Mama makes the best grilled cheese. You can have dinner with us, right, Mama?" He looked up at me pleadingly, the prospect of having his newfound father join us too exciting to pass up. I hesitated, searching Vincent's face. He stood in the entryway, uncertainty warring with longing across his features. How many times had I dreamed of this moment, to have him back under my roof? 1,000 questions burned in me, but one look at Leo's hopeful face and Vincent's anxious, yearning eyes, and the answer was clear. That sounds fine," I managed, stepping aside to fully welcome him in. "If you'd like to stay, that is." Vincent's response was immediate and wordless. He gently clasped my hand, the one I'd braced on the doorframe, and raised it to his lips. He pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles, just as he had done on that night so long ago. Warmth blossomed through me. "Nothing would make me happier," he said earnestly. Inside, as I busied myself in the tiny kitchen with grilling sandwiches, I eavesdropped on Leo excitedly giving Vincent a tour of our humble abode. "This is Mama's chair where she reads me stories. That's my toy box. Oh, and look, I have a telescope by the window to see stars. Mama says maybe one day we can see the North Star." Vincent responded with genuine interest, and soon the two of them were bent over the telescope, peering at the first evening stars blinking to life. I hovered by the stove, a wooden spatula clutched to my chest, silent tears of gratitude slipping down my cheeks at the domestic scene I never thought I'd witness. The two halves of my heart finally meeting. Yet beneath my joy, fear coiled tight. I still didn't know how Vincent was alive, where he'd been, why he hadn't contacted me. The pain of those unanswered years lingered, making me jittery. He had missed Leo's birth, his first word, his first steps. We had lost so much. Could we ever truly get past that? After dinner, which Leo insisted on eating perched beside Vincent at the table, chattering through mouthfuls of gooey sandwich, I settled my son into bed. Usually he protested bedtime, but tonight he went willingly, exhausted by excitement. I suspect he wanted to dream about magic dancing men and pirate treasure. When I emerged from Leo's room, I found Vincent standing in the lamplight of the living area, hands clasped behind him, gazing at a cluster of framed photos on my wall, most of them of Leo at various ages, plus one old picture of me laughing with my late parents. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, his face awash with complicated emotion. We regarded each other across the small room. The air felt taut, heavy with things we needed to say. I broke the silence first. We have a lot to talk about. I twisted my fingers together, unsure where to begin. Part of me wanted to launch straight into, "How are you alive?" but that felt too blunt, too raw. He nodded, stepping toward me. "We do." He hesitated, and in a gesture of old-fashioned respect, inclined his head toward the sofa. "May I sit?" Wordlessly, I sank onto the cushions, and he lowered himself beside me, not too close, as if wary of crowding me. Still, the heat of him, the familiar scent of his cologne, enveloped me. "When I left you that night," he began quietly, "I promised myself I'd keep you safe." He drew a shaky breath. "You saw what happened with Derek. Small as that was, it confirmed my fears. Being close to me could put a target on you. I thought I could manage it, but..." He raked a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as frustration with himself. I waited, my heart a hammer in my chest. A few weeks later, there was an attempt on my life, he finally said, voice low. I inhaled sharply. He continued, "A car bomb. It was meant for me and anyone with me. It went off outside my home. By a miracle I survived, but several of my men didn't." He paused, jaw clenching at the memory. "I knew then that my enemies had taken note of you, of us. I couldn't bear the thought that you might be caught in the crossfire." My stomach churned. A car bomb. I absently realized my hand had drifted to cover his where it gripped his knee. He looked down at our touching hands and gave a faint, sad smile. "I staged my death," he said, turning his hand under mine to hold it. "It was the only way to ensure they'd lose interest in you. My people arranged a believable scene. The world, you, thought I was gone. I went underground, hunting down those responsible, making sure none were left to threaten you or anyone I loved." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Tears slipped free as I absorbed his words. He had believed staying away would protect me. I believed it too, even as the personal cost to us was devastating. "Why didn't you send word?" I whispered. "Let me know you were alive. Something." Vincent's face crumpled with regret. "I wanted to. God, I wanted to 1,000 times. But I was being watched. Any hint, any leak that I still lived, and they would have turned their wrath on you. I couldn't risk it, Evelyn. And by the time it was finally over, I was too ashamed, too afraid you'd moved on, or that you'd hate me for what I'd done." A soft sob escaped me, and I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. I had hated him, at times. Hated him for disappearing without a goodbye, for leaving me to grieve him. But I also understood why he'd felt he had no choice. I don't know what to say, I managed, voice thick. I grieved you, Vincent. For years, I thought... I broke off, swallowing a wail. He moved instantly, wrapping me in his arms. My cheek pressed against his solid chest, and all the longing and heartbreak of the last 7 years poured out in a torrent of tears. He murmured softly into my hair, apologies and endearments mingling together. I'm here now, my love. I'm so sorry. So sorry. After a while, my sobs subsided to sniffles. I pulled back slightly, and he wiped my damp cheeks with gentle thumbs. I understand why you did it, I said shakily. Intellectually, I do. But do you have any idea what it was like thinking you were... My voice broke. His own eyes glistened. I know, he whispered. Because I was living in my own hell, thinking I'd lost you. I nearly came back 12 times. The night I heard Leo had been born... He closed his eyes, anguish twisting his features. I had one of my men keep discreet tabs from afar to ensure you were safe. When word reached me that you'd had a baby, my baby, I almost threw caution aside right then. My breath caught. He'd known, perhaps not right away, but he'd known Leo existed. Then why didn't you? I asked, not accusatory, just desperately curious. He shook his head. The threat wasn't eliminated yet. I couldn't risk leading them to you both. I thought you'd be safer if I stayed dead a while longer. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I searched his face, the face I'd loved so fiercely and mourned so deeply. There was no guile there, only raw sorrow. He thought he was doing the right thing. I managed a small nod. It wasn't total forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. He seemed to understand. Gently, he reached for my hand again. I know I can never get those years back, he said. But being here now with you and Leo, I feel like I've been given a miracle. And I promise you I will never waste it. If you'll allow me... His voice broke. I want to spend every day earning your trust back, being the man you and our son deserve. Fresh tears welled, but this time they were as much from relief as lingering hurt. In answer, I leaned forward and captured his lips with mine. Vincent inhaled sharply in surprise, then groaned softly and kissed me back with all the pent-up longing of 7 empty years. The kiss was salty with tears and sweet with forgiveness, gentle and then urgent, a language all its own telling me how much he'd missed me. I threaded my fingers through the silvered hair at his nape, and he pulled me firmly against him, deepening the kiss until my head spun. When at last we parted, both breathless, I rested my forehead against his. I'm still mad at you, I murmured, though my lips twitched upward. I know, he chuckled hoarsely, pressing a kiss to the tip of my nose. I'll make it up to you for the rest of my life, I swear it. I let out a watery laugh. You'd better. Then I sighed, contentment and fatigue washing over me in equal measure. We'll figure it out. But for now, let's get some rest. He nodded and glanced toward the small spare room that I used as an office. I can take the couch or... Nonsense. I cut him off softly, surprising both of us. The guest bed is made up. I'll get you some fresh blankets. His eyes searched mine, gratitude and love shining there. Thank you, Evelyn. That night, after checking on Leo once more, who had fallen asleep clutching his drawing of the magic dancing man, I drifted back toward my own bedroom. As I passed the guest room, Vincent's low voice called out, Evelyn? I peeked in. He sat on the edge of the small bed, looking almost comically large in the modest space. In the soft lamplight, the lines on his face looked deeper, but so did the warmth in his gaze. I just wanted to say goodnight, he said quietly. And thank you for letting me back in. My throat tightened. I stepped into the room, unable to resist brushing a stray lock of hair off his forehead. Good night, Vincent. On impulse, I leaned down and kissed his forehead lightly. He closed his eyes, seeming as moved by the simple touch as by any passionate kiss. When I withdrew, he caught my hand and pressed it over his heart, which thudded strong and steady beneath my palm. Sleep well, I whispered. With you here I will, he replied. In the early dawn hours, I woke to the sound of hushed giggles. I blinked my eyes open to find Leo perched on the edge of my bed, watching me with a gleeful grin. Mama, guess what? He whispered loudly. Vincent is making pancakes and he flips them really high. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Sure enough, the cozy smell of pancakes wafted in from the kitchen. Is he now? I smiled, heart swelling at how naturally Leo said Vincent like part of the family already. Climbing out of bed, I followed my son to the kitchen. There was Vincent, standing at the stove with an apron barely fitting over his broad chest. A comical trail of flour dusted his hair. He was in the middle of executing an impressive pancake flip, which landed perfectly back in the pan just as we appeared. Ta-da! He announced to Leo, who clapped. Then Vincent's gaze met mine, and the happiness there made me weak at the knees. Good morning, love. Good morning, I replied, the endearment warming me. Moving on instinct, I joined him by the stove. He immediately leaned down and kissed me softly, a gentle good morning that made Leo giggle and pretend to gag at the display. We both laughed. As we sat around the table to eat, Leo practically bouncing in his seat as Vincent regaled him with a dramatically embellished tale of how he learned to flip pancakes from a French chef in Paris. I felt like I was living someone else's charmed life. There was coffee in my favorite mug, a silly bouquet of wildflowers Vincent had spontaneously gathered from our window box and presented to me, a joyful child chattering between bites, and opposite me, the man I never thought I'd see again, smiling and holding my foot under the table with a playful squeeze. Our path forward wouldn't be without its bumps, I knew that. There were practical matters to sort. Where would we live long term? What would integrating Vincent into our daily life truly look like? And emotional scars to heal. But I also knew that whatever came, we'd face it together now. A week later, on a crisp Saturday, I found myself back in the very city where this journey began, arm in arm with Vincent as we walked into an elegant donors gala hosted by the Romano Foundation. Our little town's community center was receiving a generous endowment, and Vincent insisted we attend the event together, as a family. At first I was hesitant. I hadn't set foot in these circles since that fateful gala 7 years ago. But any nerves I had melted away under the warmth of Vincent's proud smile and the solid strength of his arm anchoring me. Gasps rippled through the crowd as we entered. Many recognized Vincent at once, stunned whispers of Romano buzzing around us. And a few recognized me too, I think, though they struggled to reconcile the confident woman in a sleek gown, her silver hair swept elegantly up, a radiant 7-year-old boy holding her hand, and Vincent Romano at her side, with the downtrodden divorcee they remembered. At dinner, a familiar figure timidly approached our table. Richard. His once robust frame had gone a bit soft, and a little gray tinged his temples. I felt an old hurt stir, But mostly, I felt nothing. Time had dulled the pain to indifference. He stammered a greeting, clearly nonplussed to see me here and with him. "Evelyn, you, look well," he managed, eyes darting nervously to Vincent, who raised an eyebrow but remained silent, one hand resting on my back. "Thank you, Richard," I replied politely. And then I introduced him to Leo, who wrinkled his nose, having heard the unflattering version of Richard in my stories, perhaps. The interaction was mercifully brief. Richard excused himself after a few awkward pleasantries, likely unnerved by Vincent's cool, assessing stare. As Richard shuffled away, Vincent leaned down to my ear. "Are you all right?" I realized I was entirely all right. The closure was subtle and complete. I no longer needed anything from Richard, not his apology, regret, or approval. I had everything I needed. I smiled up at the man who had given me that and more. Never been better. Later, under the crystal chandeliers of the ballroom, Vincent extended his hand to me. "May I have this dance, tesoro mio?" he asked, using an Italian term of endearment that he'd begun using for me, my treasure. I placed my hand in his without hesitation. Always. We swept onto the dance floor and into a waltz, and I swear I heard a few scattered claps and delighted murmurs of, "They're dancing again," from those who recalled our first dance so long ago. But soon the world narrowed to just Vincent's eyes on mine, his hand holding me close. He spun me in a gentle circle and teased, "You know, you once dragged a certain man onto a dance floor and he told you he didn't dance." I laughed softly. What can I say? Perhaps he hadn't found the right partner yet. His arm tightened at my waist. Indeed. Perhaps he was waiting for a bold, beautiful woman to pull him into her world. My heart fluttered as he dipped me slightly, exactly as he'd done that first night. I felt weightless, utterly safe in his arms. As the music swelled to a close, Vincent gazed at me, love shining openly on his face. "Ti amo," he whispered, the Italian words for "I love you." He'd been teaching them to Leo and me, weaving bits of his heritage into our daily life. I lifted our joined hands and pressed a kiss to the back of his "I love you too." He grinned and, to my surprise and delight, sank down on one knee in the middle of the dance floor. A hush fell around us, but I barely registered our audience. My hands flew to my mouth as he produced a small velvet box from inside his tuxedo. "Evelyn," he said, voice ringing out clear and strong, trembling just a touch. I had planned to do this tomorrow in a quieter moment, but why wait? Soft laughter rippled through the watching crowd. My eyes blurred with tears of joy. "You have been the bravest, most patient woman. You gave me a beautiful son and a reason to fight my way back to life. Will you marry me and make me the happiest man on earth?" Tears spilled down my cheeks, but I was smiling so wide it hurt. I gently tugged him back to his feet. My knees were far too weak to trust at the moment, and threw my arms around him. "Yes," I whispered, right in his ear. "Of course. Yes." Cheers and applause exploded around us as he slid a stunning sapphire ring. He'd remembered my birthstone, I realized with a laugh, onto my finger. Leo wriggled through the crowd moments later, having been looked after by Marjorie, dear Marjorie, who was dabbing her eyes happily nearby. Our boy launched himself at us and we swept him into our embrace, making it a family hug to the delight of all. In the midst of the celebration, Derek hovered at the edge of the crowd, clapping politely but looking rather piqued. I approached him, Vincent at my side, and gave him a cordial nod. "No hard feelings, Derek," I said graciously. "I wish you well." It was the kind of parting I'd dreamed of. Me on top, him rendered irrelevant. It was brief, but enough. That night, back in our hotel suite, I stood out on the balcony overlooking the city lights, wrapped in Vincent's jacket and in his arms. Leo had long since fallen asleep between mountains of hotel pillows, thoroughly tuckered out. "You're quiet," Vincent murmured, nuzzling my neck. I tilted my face up to the stars. Our stars. I was just thinking how, if someone told me 7 years ago I'd be right here, right now, I'd have said they were dreaming. Vincent turned me in his arms, so I faced him. He tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind my ear tenderly. "Sometimes reality is even better than dreams," he said. I traced the lines of his beloved face, marveling that he was real and mine to touch. Then I teased, "Well, it certainly took you long enough to ask me to marry you, Mr. Romano." He laughed, a rich, deep sound I adored. "I wanted to ask you the day I returned, but I thought it prudent to let you yell at me a bit first." I smirked. "Don't worry, I'm not done making you grovel. Husband or not, you'll be making up those lost years for a long time." "Yes, cara mia," he agreed readily, then added with a playful gleam, "Though I think saving you from speeding cars and catching murderous rivals counts for a little credit." I rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to the new scar above his brow. "Fine. A little." He held me close then, his voice turning thoughtful. "And in 7 more years?" I looked into those eyes that had first ensnared me across a ballroom. They were softer now, full of contentment and the wisdom of lessons learned the hard way. I thought of Leo growing up, perhaps siblings by then. Vincent certainly seemed keen on the idea of filling a nursery, or if his not-so-subtle hints were to be believed, of our home filled with laughter and maybe the pitter-patter of more little feet, of me continuing to run the bookshop, with expansion funds courtesy of one doting investor fiancé, and of Vincent perhaps finally finding peace from the ghosts of his past as he embraced the simple joys of bake sales and soccer games. "In 7 years," I said, brushing my nose against his, "I'll still be breaking the rules and pulling you onto dance floors, and you'll still be finding ways to keep life very interesting." My ring caught the moonlight and sparkled between us. Vincent smiled, the roguish, confident smile of a man who had found his place. "As long as we're doing it together, Evelyn." "Always together," I promised. He kissed me then under the expansive night sky, thoroughly, passionately, like a man who would never take another kiss for granted. I melted against him, reveling in how perfectly we fit. Behind us, through the open balcony doors, I heard the sleepy voice of our son. "Mama? Papa?" We broke apart, exchanging a joyful look at the new title Leo had spontaneously started using for Vincent. Papa. We hurried inside to tend to him, leaving the night and its stars to themselves. As we settled Leo back to sleep, after a trip to the bathroom and a glass of water, of course, Vincent and I stood at the foot of the bed, watching his chest rise and fall in peaceful slumber. Vincent's hand found mine and gave it a squeeze. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered, not wanting to wake our child. "For what, love?" he whispered back. "For coming back. For our son. For this second chance." I looked up at him, tears in my eyes. He lifted my hand to his lips. It's I who should thank you. You saved me, Evelyn, more than once. You believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it. We fell quiet, simply holding each other, gazing at the miracle of Leo, at the miracle of us. In the quiet, Vincent's cane, propped by the door, caught my eye. Leo had insisted he bring it tonight. What's a magic dancing man without his cane, after all? I smiled, recalling how our story began with that very cane, with a man who never accepted any touch, and a woman who had been afraid she'd never reach out again. I felt Vincent's lips pressed to my hair. A penny for your thoughts, he murmured. I intertwined our fingers and led him toward the bedroom, exhaustion tugging at my limbs but happiness buoying my soul. I was just thinking how right this is, I said softly. All of it, even the hard parts led us here. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room in silvered darkness except for the city glow through the curtains. Pulling me gently down onto the bed, he wrapped me in his arms. I went willingly, curling against the warmth of his chest. You make me a better man, Evelyn, he whispered into the quiet. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, or that my past won't occasionally cast a shadow. But I promise you that I will devote every breath to making you and Leo happy. I pressed a kiss over his heart, where I felt it thrumming steadily. And I'll spend every breath proving you were right to take a chance on a foolish, lonely woman at a gala. I tilted up and added impishly, even if I had to do the hard part and ask you to dance first. He chuckled softly and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. Boldness suits you. It's one of the many reasons I fell in love with you. We shared a slow, tender kiss, our legs tangling comfortably beneath the sheets. When we parted, I yawned, and he brushed his thumb over my cheek. Sleep, Tesoro, he said. I'll be here when you wake. I nodded, nuzzling into the crook of his neck where I fit so perfectly. As I drifted off, I heard the steady cadence of his breathing, and beyond it, the faint, reassuring thump of his heart. My last conscious thought was that I felt truly, completely safe for the first time in forever. We had walked through fire to get to this peace, but it was worth every trial and tear. Together, we were writing a new chapter filled with midlife adventure, mutual respect, and a love that only deepened with time. Our story, full of heartbreak and healing, danger and solace, loss and love found again, had shaped us into who we needed to be for each other. And now, surrounded by the quiet symphony of our sleeping child's breaths and my fiancé's gentle snores starting up beside me, I closed my eyes with a smile on my lips. Happily ever afters, I realized, aren't endpoints at all. They're choices, daily choices to love, forgive, and embrace what life brings. And as for our little family, we were choosing happiness for all the days to come. And indeed, our happily ever after was only the beginning of a whole new adventure. One thing is certain. Whatever the future held, we would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart,